You're listening to the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Bill McIntyre, and it's time for this week's Long Island News, the news show that talks to newsmakers from Nassau and Suffolk County that matter to Long Island and Long Islanders like you. So each week, we'll have a conversation about issues that affect all of us. I live on Long Island, and like all of you, I want to know more about where my tax dollars are going and want to know more about the people making the big decisions that affect all of us, which is what this show is all about. And we'd like to welcome back to the show Yancey Roy, the Albany Bureau Chief from Newsday and Newsday.com. Good to see you again, Yancey. How are you?
Good to be here, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, we'll get right to it. You had reported, I guess, just a little while ago that the Kathy Hochul holds a 14 to 16 point lead over her Republican challenger. That's Lee Zeldin. What's going on with that? How is Zeldin responding?
Well, everyone responds to the polls by kind of saying, hey, looks great for us. On the one hand, 14 to 16 points in two different polls is a substantial lead. I think it's reflective of a couple of things. First of all, the Democrats have a huge enrollment advantage. Women voters are certainly strongly favoring Hochul. The Republican camp, I think they would try to take solace from the fact that 14 to 16 points is not as bad as the enrollment advantage and arguably closer than that. So for their perspective, 14 to 16 points is not something that cannot be overcome by November.
Now, here's what I have is a quote. While Hochul has a commanding lead in the New York City region, 63% to 17, she trails Zeldin 49 to 43 in New York City suburbs. Statistically, even in upstate, with Zeldin trailing 44 to 43. Yeah, so it's close when they break it down to different locations.
Yeah, that's kind of in fitting with some historical trends. You go back through governor's races, whether it was Cuomo's term or even Pataki, although we can get to that in a second. The usual formula is in statewide races is, the Democrats will win New York City. The Republican will almost assuredly win upstate. Suburbs can fluctuate a little bit. If you're the Republican, what you try to do is limit your losses in New York City, not just get, outrageously killed by some, 50 points or so. And that's going back to George Pataki, the last Republican governor. That's what he was able to do, is kind of limit some of the damage in New York City, because he was able to win some voters with his environmental record and persuade some progressive city voters to support him. If you're the Democrat, you're going to get New York City. You want to make sure that a couple of things, that New York City voters don't get complacent and that they go out. They need to have a higher percentage turnout, because they in terms of proportion, the city voters often don't come out quite as in big numbers as some of the other regions of the state. And then you skirmish for the suburbs, and you also skirmish for the independent voters. At a time where nationally things are more partisan and less bipartisan than ever. The polls showed that Democrats overwhelmingly favored Hochul. Republicans overwhelmingly favored Zeldin. The independents, it's pretty even, and I'm going off the top of my head here. I think Kathy Hochul had a 2-point lead, or maybe it was Zeldin, but I believe Kathy Hochul had a 2-point lead. But it was all within the realm of the margin of error. So you could say they're kind of working on the independents. It shows that Hochul in the lead, not insurmountable. We've got 3 months to go, and there's a lot of factors going on, whether they are nationally, state, or even locally.
Yeah. We also have Chuck Schumer. He supposedly had at least a 21-point lead in the polls over, who's that, Joe Pinion? Any updates on what's going on there? Or?
Well, look, Chuck Schumer has been a senator now, and he's now in his 24th year. He's got a large war chest. He's the top Democrat in the U.S. Senate. a lot of name recognition, a lot of, record built up over the years, whether it's on local issues or national issues. And he has basically cruised to re-election ever since he won for the first time back in '98. The Republican Joe Pinion is not well known by the electorate. Certainly, I think it was more than 80% of the people said they did not know, or maybe it's even close to 90% did not know Joe Pinion.
Right.
And Republicans are not putting a lot of money in that race right now. So it's not surprising to see Schumer with a 21-point lead.
So almost as though Republicans kind of feel like it's a done deal. We're not going to waste any time.
Well, you could say broadly what's true nationally is that some of these national committees, campaign committees, have to pick their battles, right? They can't flood money into every race in every state. And there might be some races in states where Republicans don't spend a lot, just the same way as Democrats might not spend a lot on some races in parts of the Deep South.
Yeah.
Or the West.
I also have a note here. State Attorney General Letitia James leading Republican Michael Henry by 14 to 18 points. That's still...
Yeah, I think Michael Henry, same thing as Joe Pinion. He's not well known, and there's not been a lot of money in his campaign just yet. It is an interesting thing that we did note that Letitia James, of all the Democrats on the ticket, had the lowest job approval rating. It was in the neighborhood of 40%. That's something to keep an eye on. It might not be low enough to spark an upset. You can never tell. Right. But it's certainly among the statewide candidates on the tickets, which are Kathy Hochul for governor, Schumer for Senate, Tom DiNapoli controller. Tish James had the lowest approval rating of any of those Democrats.
Wow. I also have another thing here on those. There's the report about bail reform. What do I have here? Last weekend, reported the second full year of bail reform in New York. The data shows the number of criminal defendants who are rearrested after being released remains relatively low, 1 out of 6. And that is ticked downward. Now, if you look at the media, it's 90 out of 100 are doing bad things, What is their attitude toward? I mean, there's still people calling to get rid of it, repeal the whole Megillah.
Well, it's certainly a campaign issue, and it's going to remain a campaign issue throughout all of this year. What we try to do is look at some of the numbers. These are the latest stats reported by the Office of Court Administration and also the Department of Criminal Justice Services, which compile arrest data and outcomes in court and sort of look to see what was there. Basically, look, one of the fears from critics is that someone will be arrested on a crime, released, and then go out and commit either sort of a run-of-the-mill misdemeanor or something truly horrific. Right. So in the case of the former, just committing any crime, what you're finding is 83% of people who are charged initially aren't rearrested later. And if you're looking for violent crime, basically 97.5% are not rearrested for some violent crime. About 2.5% are. Look, every violent crime is a tragedy for those involved, for sure. The issue here is one of the issues here is that bail reform is fairly new here, and there's no real benchmarks to look at, say, 2012, 10 years ago. What was the rearrest rate then? Because the system was different and stats were kind of not kept quite the same. So a lot of the experts who follow these say it's going to take several years before you find out all of the effects, but it's certainly, while there are some high-profile cases, it's certainly also true that it's only a small percentage of people who get arrested, released, arrested again.
Right. Just a reminder for the listening audience, you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, and we are speaking with Yancey Roy, who is the Albany Bureau Chief for Newsday and Newsday.com. What do we have here? A little while ago, you reported that the governor had announced the start of a pandemic after action review. It's going to examine New York's response to the pandemic, including the deaths in nursing homes. Is there anything going on with that?
Well, Governor Hochul had said she would do this. I think part of this was she had taken over from Cuomo. She was, certainly looking to distinguish herself from Andrew Cuomo, and some of the controversies, whether it was sexual harassment or decisions made during the pandemic, such as how to handle patients in nursing homes. She'd been under pressure, mostly from Republicans, but some Democrats as well, to look into this. She agreed to, and then there was a long delay between saying, okay, we'll look at it, and then actually doing something to start to put together a panel or some sort of process for looking at it. It's one of those things that I think you can probably be fairly confident of saying that there's nothing likely to be coming from it till certainly after the election. There's not, the deadline for preliminary filings rolls past the election, so I don't know that we'll know anything soon on that.
What's where is Cuomo now? What's he been doing? You think he's going to run for? You think he's going to run for president?
He's been lying low. There was the former governor, made a few appearances and wrote some op-eds here and there earlier this year, but it's been fairly quiet since then. Yeah.
Well, do you think he's thinking about running for president, or is this? Would it be, to me, it seems like a bad time to want to put your name out there and go, but.
Oh, I wouldn't have a clue as to what he's thinking himself, but he's always been in the political world. I know that he felt like he was unfairly driven to resignation. Of course, a lot of people disagree with that characterization, but that's how I think he views it. I think that there are times where people come back. Andrew himself had kind of flamed out in the 2002 gubernatorial campaign, sat back and returned to the scene 4 years later. So that can always happen in American politics. There usually takes a period of sitting out. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The one thing I do know is that I'm not a good guesser when it comes to what these folks might or might not do. I come from an era when something looked bad politically, they didn't do it. Now that's totally changed. It doesn't really matter what it looks like, and if we want to do it, we're just going to do it anyway. It's a whole new political atmosphere. One of the issues, one of the major news stories now, and I just read, we all know the Secret Service had gotten rid of some of their text messages in the course of, after the January 6th thing and all that. And now we come to find out that so did the Pentagon and so did Homeland Security. And I think a big part of what the last administration did was this undermining of our democratic institutions, things we trusted. And now to read a story like that, I get this sense that our government is infiltrated with, I don't know, people who aren't necessarily following their oaths. It only takes one guy in a chain of command to really screw something up. The example would be the National Guard not making it to Washington, D.C. It didn't take a whole committee to say they're not coming. It took one guy to not pick up the phone or to hang it up and ignore so that hours could pass and nobody said anything. I think the looking at the way that things are so partisan, I'm a Republican, I have to vote this way, and that's it. the gridlock, it's kind of scary moving forward what kind of atmosphere we're going to play in. And I don't know that Albany reflects the national temperature or that same kind of thing, but it seems to. What are your thoughts on any of that? I flipped out when I saw that government actually had NDAs, that they were asking people to work.
Non-disclosure.
Non-disclosure agreements.
I'll work it back to New York this way. A couple of things. One is, the ongoing January 6th hearings have been in the news for weeks and have, I think, gathered a lot more attention and momentum than people might have thought they would earlier this year. And I think you're seeing that they are in the public attention, and that Democrats will certainly try to use these in campaigns in New York and elsewhere. The issue of January 6, 2021, which was the mob insurrection at the Capitol and the attempt to stop the certification of the 2020 election. And, it's interesting how election cycles work and how issues come and go. Earlier this year, the Republicans were really pushing things like inflation, crime rates, the economy, that sort of thing. Well, and over the last few months, you've seen the Democrats now pushing some issues that will appeal to their voters. Certainly the overturning of Roe v. Wade abortion rights, and the continuing saga of January and continuing investigation of January 6th. You're certainly trying to see in New York, Democrats use that against Lee Zeldin. He had voted against the certification of the election. And then back to your other point, though, is New York compared to Congress. I don't know. It's quite different. First of all, folks are probably aware and should be aware that the divisions from left to right in New York State are not nearly as wide as the divisions of left to right in Congress. Mm-hmm. They just aren't. It's a blue progressive state, and although there are some really conservative members of the legislature, by and large, there are a lot of Republicans who might be considered conservative in New York are probably considered moderate in other states. So there's not that wide range of polarity, I think. And then second of all, the legislature, right now it's all Democratic controlled, and for a long time it was split with one house Republican controlled. And certainly there's a lot of valid criticisms about dysfunction in Albany, but that said, they do strive and they do usually succeed to get budgets close to on time. Mm-hmm. They keep the government running. There's no such thing as like government shutdowns that you see here that you see in Washington. And by and large, you see a lot of legislation passing. Now, you might like some of that legislation, you might not like some of it, but I don't think it nearly has the same, on any scale, any kind of the same gridlock that you would see in Washington. Right.
Well, and kudos to, those folks at least to figure out a way to work together. It gets distressing. We always talk here about we try to stay up on the news and things that are going on, but we try to stay sane at the same time. And how do you do it? How do you do it?
Well, it's always a fascinating job. That's part of it. There's always something going on in different realms, different topics, whether it's, like you say, we talked about bail, there's state budgets, there's school budgets, there's casinos, there's gun legislation, there is facial recognition technology. There's always something emerging in society and in legal circles that warrants attention from the legislature and the media, because you're trying to keep pace with things that are going on that affect our communities.
Yeah. Well, just a real quick one: the gun reform issue. They gave final approval to legislation that had set new requirements for obtaining a permit to carry a concealed weapon. We spoke to the police commissioner, and he assured everybody that no one that couldn't get a gun before is getting them now. And he let us know that he signs personally every concealed carry permit that comes into Nassau County, which was nice. So I said, "Oh, so you know their names?" He goes, "I know everybody that's got a gun legally anyway." Anything new with what's going on with that up there, or?
No, nothing since the legislation passed. I mean, there was threats from opponents of the legislation that say, "We'll see you in court," and that's centered mostly around an element of the bill where Democrats had tacked on a long list of places that you'd be prohibited from having a concealed weapon. All sorts of places, sports stadiums and any place that served alcohol and that sort of thing. Right. There was promises that was too restrictive and that we'll see you in court. It hasn't happened as we're speaking here today, but who knows down the line.
Yeah. There was an interesting thing in Georgia that there was supposed to be a big, like a Lollapalooza kind of concert, but they apparently were holding it in a public park. And because of the carry law, they didn't want any guns at the show at all. But people sued apparently and said, well, that's a state park. So that's one of the areas that we're allowed to do this. So they canceled the whole show because one guy wanted to bring a gun.
I don't know the laws in Georgia in regards to this topic. I know that parks, were one area that New York legislators wanted to make off limits for sure, and did so in the law. So.
And the difference between the New York legislature or the New York law is that if a business was going to let you carry, they'd have to put a sign on their door that says, I guess, weapons welcomed or something.
Come on in.
Yeah.
This is, it's called you have to be an affirmative show that you would allow it. Like the default position, so to speak, is not that weapons are allowed unless posted otherwise. It's the other way around. Weapons are not allowed unless posted otherwise by the business owner. Right.
Oof. Oh boy. Well, anything else you can tell us about that's interesting you
Hey, stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of interesting primaries on August 23rd. Across the island, we've got big primaries in Suffolk County and in Nassau County and in the congressional races. And there's a couple of very interesting state Senate primaries in either county as well. So that's going to be something to watch.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so we'll be watching for your byline in the paper, because I know you ride herd on Albany. But I want to thank you. I know you have something to run to or whatever. I didn't want to, use up your valuable time. But again, we'll hopefully talk to you in a little while as we get farther into this, and then you can keep us abreast of what's going on.
Will do. Always a pleasure to talk with you, Bill.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Okay.
And again, we want to thank Yancey Roy, who is the Albany Bureau Chief for Newsday at Newsday.com. He's the guy we always check in with to take the temperature of what's going on up in Albany. And it was good to hear that, at least the local legislature or the New York State legislature doesn't seem to be as, what could I say, rancid as our national government. I don't know. There are things going on in the country. It can be scary. I was kind of stunned to see, that notice about not only did the Secret Service get rid of their text messages, but so did the Pentagon and so did Homeland Security. That's unsettling. And I don't know what role non-disclosure agreements should play in government. I understand national security, but that blanket phrase has been used so many times, and apparently there's can be no argument when someone invokes it. Oh no, that's national security. Can't touch it. Okay. But there are a lot of good folks out there. You know, there is hope. There's a lot of good folks fighting for the little guy. The legislator we spoke to, some of the others, you know, they do have an uphill battle, but they're going to go in there and fight. Yeah, just like the, you know, we've been having this argument or campaigning for a $15 minimum wage. By the time the argument is over, I already think the minimum wage should be $25. And the real bugger kind of, you know, they know it. I mean, people are keeping pay low. They don't talk about the extreme profits. All of these companies filing we made $8 billion this quarter. But they're all screaming that they're poor and they can't pay workers. And one of the good ones that I saw was there was an ad for a job, and it always says competitive pay. And someone responded that if it was so competitive, you'd tell me what it is, instead of using the term competitive pay. This is really a problem. And inflation is being invoked all the time. And then we have the Federal Reserve that's going to bring the hammer down on people who are already hurting. And from what I glean from the Federal Reserve is that they're actually going to be bringing up the interest rates, and their target is something like 4.5%. They're only at 2 point something now. I don't even know what that is. But the point being is that that's certainly not going to help the little guy. And one of the things that they never address is the outrageous corporate profits, which is an inflationary pressure, probably more so than what the working man is taking home. But you got to pick the little guy to complain about. Anyway, we try to here at this week's Long Island News, we try to bring you the people and have them tell you what's going on, so you know who said it, and you're not getting digested through someone's own likes and dislikes and then hearing a story. I also wanted to remember to thank Kim Tracy, who was engineering the show for the last couple of weeks, and she's a genius. I don't know how they do it sometimes. I sit here and just look at the microphone and say what I want, and she's running around and keeping it all together, turning the dials, and the show know that too. He's pretty good at this stuff. In any event, we thank you for joining us and remind you that you can catch this week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 o'clock right here on the station that helps you communicate, 90.3 WHPC.